with Shape of the City. I am at the state capitol with Glen Parks. He is the coordinator for the Nebraska Human Trafficking Task Force.
That's correct, yeah.
Explain what is human trafficking for our viewers who may not fully understand what it is.
That's a great question because there is some confusion about this. Human trafficking, in the shortest definition, is modern day slavery. So it's compelling someone through force, fraud, or coercion to do something that they don't give their consent to do. This comes in two main categories. One is labor trafficking, in which you force someone to do what would maybe be a normal job, but against their will, and you don't pay them or things like this. And the other one that gets more headlines actually is sex trafficking, in which people are compelled against their will without their consent to engage in commercial sex or pornography. Now there's one exception to that last category. If someone is under 18 and they're involved in commercial sex, a commercial sex act, that is by definition sex trafficking because someone under 18 can't consent legally to a commercial sex act.
Now, I'm probably like a lot of people who have this hard time imagining it going on in their own community.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So how did the task force get started? What was going on that got you guys going?
It's only been since 2000 that the United States has had laws against human trafficking labeled that way. And actually in Nebraska, it's only been against the law, there's only been a crime against it since 2006. So it is something kind of new that we're looking at. When Doug Peterson ran for the AG's office, one of the things he emphasized was he wanted to really ramp up our addressing human trafficking in all its forms here. And one of the main ways he's fulfilling that promise as the AG is through this human trafficking task force. So we got a federal grant to help start it, and it's intentionally multidisciplinary. So we work both with the law enforcement, which is more my focus, and also we've partnered with the services because, as you imagine, this is a crime that has living victims. I mean, the illegally owned substance is a human being. And so it's very important that law enforcement now work collaboratively with victim services. So the AG's office and the Salvation Army jointly applied for this grant, and we got it. So it's kind of co-led by the Salvation Army.
So let's talk a little bit more about what the task force does.
Okay, sure.
So what is your role? Who are the people you're partnering with across the state?
So I am the coordinator of the task force, and it's a very good title actually. It's quite accurate because I coordinate a lot of different entities. We kind of talk about it in three categories. There's law enforcement, there are service providers who work directly with the victims, and then there's community partners, which are lots of other NGOs and individuals that are helping out. And really each one of those is essential. We've organized, because the state's pretty large geographically and we can't meet often all together, we've divided the state into 5 regions, and so regionally, especially the law enforcement, with some services included, meets at least quarterly, and each of the regions are doing proactive operations, and so for those, of course, we meet more often and to plan those. So that's the law enforcement side. On the services side, the Salvation Army is organizing what services are available in each of these regions, so we have some contacts. So for instance, let's say there's a patrolman who pulls over someone for speeding at 3 in the morning. He's got 3 inappropriately dressed, unrelated 16-year-olds in the car, and it doesn't look like they're related. So maybe this officer separates them out and finds out, yes, this is actually sex trafficking going on. He knows what to do with the driver, right? This person who's probably, is at least alleged, a trafficker, but that patrolman might not know exactly what to do with these 3 16-year-olds in the middle of Nebraska. It's 3 in the morning. What do you do? So we are developing a kind of database and a network of people who could take those 3 girls that night, and then for the next week, and then maybe for the next year.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, but it's fulfilling.
So you guys have a new campaign going on. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about the campaign and how our viewers can be part of the solution.
So it's called Demand an End, and it actually started with, there's a group called Street Grace in Georgia, and they worked with the Attorney General in Georgia to develop this, and now there's, I think it's about 9 states and growing of groups that are organized to do this. So it's called Demand an End. It's a little play on words because we're demanding an end to human trafficking. That's kind of straightforward, but it's really focused on the demand side. So we want to end the demand for sex trafficking of minors. We in the task force look at the problem of sex trafficking as a market. People are doing this because they make money doing it, right? And if there were no one in Nebraska who would buy this, there would stop being people coming here to sell it, right? So it really is that. So we look at both sides, of course. We're enforcing the law against the traditional traffickers, the pimps, the people that force people into this. But we're also now, and with this campaign, really focusing and wanting to spread the word that we're looking at the demand side. The unicameral has recently given us two really big tools in this fight. One is last session, they raised the penalty on trafficking, labor and sex trafficking. So for instance, sex trafficking of a minor is what's called a Class 1B felony, which means the minimum penalty is 20 years to life. The second tool, which you put in combination with this, is they've included buyers along with the sellers as human traffickers. So this means that if someone in Nebraska decides that they either do or attempt to buy a minor for sex, they could be convicted for sex trafficking and spend 20 years or more, be sentenced to 20 years or more in prison. So what we really hope to do is to get the word out to Nebraska. Of course, sex is not something that should be bought or sold. Prostitution itself is illegal, of course. But we want those people, there are people that doesn't stop, right? There's people that still, it's illegal, they know maybe it's immoral, they're still gonna do it. We would like them to know that in addition to that, we are looking for you, and we're doing these operations to find people who are willing to do this, and we're going to prosecute them to the full extent of the law. The reason I appreciate the opportunity to come on your program to talk about this is because even though I work in the criminal bureau of the AG's office, our job is to prosecute. Our objective is safe communities, and I would much prefer to convince people not to ever even attempt or look to buy a minor for sex than for them to do that and then for us to catch them and prosecute them, right? So the more we can get the word out that there's a very high price to pay, not just morally, but now in the criminal system, I hope that will discourage more and more people from even looking into this.
Well, let's say a viewer is in their community, they see something suspicious. Maybe there's a house that they don't know what's going on,
right.
Or maybe they're just out and about. What should those people do?
That's exactly the right point. We are, a community of Nebraskans, and there are places that someone who has a utility, or a plumber or whatever, they might see things that the police would never be able to see, right? And so the first thing I would encourage people to do is learn the signs. Some of them are obvious. You think about, well, this is a sex trafficking victim. They're abused. They're being forced to do something they don't want to do. So there's some things you can imagine. Some things are not so obvious. So I would encourage them to go to the AG's website. There's a human trafficking page there that gives you some resources. But if they do see something that looks funny, and because they're a little informed about what this might look like, I encourage them to call. If it's an emergency, if someone's being dragged out by their hair or something, call 911, of course. But if it's a suspicion, a lot of times I'll mention, as an example, if there's a massage parlor in your neighborhood and it seems like only guys go there at night or something, that's maybe not worth calling 911, but I would very strongly encourage them to call the hotline. It's a national hotline. The number is 888-3737-888. And if they call that number and tell them the person that they're in Nebraska, they'll be put in contact with Nebraska people. If it's a law enforcement issue, they'll be put in contact with the State Patrol, and there's several agencies that will get the email about this. If they're a victim or they're calling on behalf of a victim and they don't want to talk to law enforcement, but they want to talk to a counselor, then they would be put in contact with a person in Nebraska that's professional to do that.
Is there anything else you want to make sure that our viewers are left with thinking about?
I would love just to re-emphasize that this is not something that we're tolerating in Nebraska, and especially the demand side. I think that's something that everybody can spread the word about, that this is, we're looking for it. This is not something that we're okay with, and we want to discourage people, but those who actually seek out minors for sex will be prosecuted. So, thanks.
Thank you so much for the work you're doing.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa, I appreciate it.